All right, so this time you've sent us quite a stack of excerpts from David Copperfield. Dickens, always so much to unpack with him, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, well let's jump in and see what we've got here.
Sounds good.
So David Copperfield, it's a classic coming of age story.
Right.
We follow David through his whole life, childhood, relationships, tons of characters.
Yeah, and you can really see in these excerpts, even just these scenes, how Dickens is so good at weaving those personal stories together.
Yeah.
With like social commentary, like that scene with young David and his Aunt Betsy when he first meets her.
Yeah, arriving all covered in dirt, looking like he crawled out of a chimney. Talk about a first impression.
Right, exactly. And, Betsy's reaction is so telling. She just takes charge.
Oh, totally.
And I think it does a couple of things. It sets her up as this strong figure who's obviously going to be important in David's life.
Right.
But also, it makes you think about society back then. This young boy basically orphaned,
Yeah.
having to fend for himself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Really highlights how vulnerable kids were.
And you have that contrast, too, between David being all dirty and neglected, and then Betsy's world, which is so neat and ordered.
Right. Like it sets the stage for all the challenges he's going to have to face.
Yeah, totally.
Speaking of challenges, we then meet Mr. Murdstone, David's stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, he's a piece of work.
Oh, yeah.
Harsh discipline, controlling.
That line that you picked out, I knew quite well that he was looking at us both. So creepy. It just really captures that feeling of him always watching, always judging.
Yeah, it's like this oppressive presence.
Makes you wonder what that does to a kid growing up like that.
Well, and that's a big question, right? Like Dickens really shows how these early experiences really stay with David and shape him. Think about how Murdstone is so strict. And then you have Peggotty.
Peggotty, yeah.
Such a warm, loving presence.
Yeah, she's like that bright spot in his childhood, all that love and support. Every kid needs that, right? Especially when things are tough. Do you think it makes Murdstone's style seem even worse, having that contrast?
Oh, absolutely. You need that genuine connection, that empathy. If you don't have people like Peggotty, you can only imagine how much harder things would have been for him.
And then there's Steerforth.
Yeah.
Who is a totally different kind of influence on David. He's charming, sure, but there's something about him almost dangerous.
Yeah.
Like a superficiality.
Totally. That quote about fame, like why bother working hard when you can just coast on charm, so telling about his whole outlook on life.
Makes you think, how easily you can get swayed by charisma? Especially when you're young. David clearly admires Steerforth, but it feels like maybe Dickens is trying to tell us something, like warning us about people like him.
Oh, I think it's a great point. Steerforth is dangerous. He represents that temptation to just focus on appearances, on easy success, and not on putting in the real work and doing things the right way. And that theme, appearances versus reality, it comes up a lot in Dickens.
And it's still relevant, right? Today, too. We see it all the time. People get drawn to those who look good on the surface, even if you're not so great underneath.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you have David's crush on Dora Spenlow.
Oh, Dora.
She adds some lightness to the story, right?
Definitely.
Right away, you can see their personalities clashing.
Right, yeah.
She seems sweet and innocent, but maybe a little naive, it feels like.
Yeah.
Dickens might be setting us up for some classic young love drama. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think you're spot on. Dickens loved to explore the messiness of relationships. How do you balance your ideals with who's actually a good fit for you? What do you actually value?
Yeah. Makes you wonder if heartbreak is on the horizon.
And don't forget the setting of all this, too. Victorian England. It was a tough time.
Right.
You see glimpses of it in these excerpts. Poverty, inequality, a world changing really fast.
It's a reminder that Dickens wasn't just telling stories, he was commenting on society.
Oh, for sure. The personal and the political, it's all there in his work. Take Salem House.
Oh, yeah, that boarding school.
Yeah.
That part about Mr. Creakle filing the students' teeth. I mean, talk about Dickensian horror.
It's brutal. It's like he's using Salem House to show us how messed up the education system was, especially for poor kids.
Yeah, it's a good contrast with the more positive environments David has later on.
Exactly. Makes you realize how important those good influences are.
And speaking of memorable characters, I can't forget the more quirky ones, like Mr. Dick.
Oh, Mr.
Betsy Trotwood's lodger, with his obsession with King Charles.
He's so interesting. At first, you might think he's just there for laughs. But I think there's more to him.
Yeah, I agree.
Like the thing about how he can't keep King Charles out of his writing, it's almost like a symbol. you know? Like he's dealing with some historical trauma, but in this
Yeah.
kind of funny, sad way.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like Dickens is saying,
Yeah.
the past always affects us on a personal level.
Yeah.
And a bigger level, too.
Then we have Uriah Heep, always so humble.
Creepy Uriah.
Yeah, and that creepy fascination with Agnes Wickfield. Not funny at all.
Oh, he's like giddy. A masterclass in how to create a character who is both pathetic
Yeah.
and terrifying. That whole humble act, it's so fake.
Yeah.
It's like he's hiding something much worse underneath.
Yeah, it's like he's weaponizing it. Like being meek is a way to get what he wants.
Exactly. And you just know trouble is coming.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely going to be a problem.
A different kind of problem, though. It's not brute force with him. It's all manipulation. Lies.
And that thing with Agnes, it's a bad sign.
For sure.
Okay, but before we get too deep into that, we have to talk about Mr. Micawber.
Oh, Mr. Micawber.
Always waiting for something to turn up.
He is such a classic Dickens character.
Yeah.
He's funny, but also tragic. He's optimistic, but he's always in debt.
Yeah, that quote about his income and expenses. It's funny, but it's also really sad. So many people struggle with money, even today. Trying to make ends meet, it's tough.
It really shows you how Dickens, he was writing about a specific time, but he was also tapping into these universal things that we all still deal with.
And, even though he's flawed, there's something about Mr. Micawber that you just like. He believes in himself so much, and he never gives up. It's almost inspiring.
It is. It reminds us that even when things are really bad, we can still find hope, and we can still find humor.
And speaking of hope and despair, David's childhood, it's coming to an end. Things with Mr. Murdstone get really bad, and he has to face the adult world way too soon.
It's a turning point for
Yeah.
sure. He's not a kid anymore.
Right.
He's out in the world, and he's got to figure things out on his own.
It's a rough start, but he's got to do it. It's part of growing up, finding his own way.
Exactly.
So Dickens really throws David into the fire here, making him face this harsh adult world while he's still dealing with all this baggage from his childhood.
Yeah, it's a tough time for him, this section, especially when he's working at that warehouse. Murdstone and Grinby's. You really see how bad things were for poor people back then in Victorian England.
It's awful seeing him having to pawn his stuff just to survive. I mean, he had it relatively good at Betsy's, right?
Yeah. He did. It's like Dickens wants to show us how easily things could fall apart back then for anyone.
Yeah.
1 minute you're okay and the next you're barely scraping by.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Dickens knew that firsthand.
Exactly. He lived it. So it's not just some outsider looking in. He gets it. You can tell in how he describes David's life at the warehouse.
Oh, yeah. It's so grim. The long hours, the boring work. It's like he's trapped. You don't see work portrayed like that very often in books from that time.
Right. Most books then would make work seem, romantic. But Dickens, he shows the reality, how it wears you down physically and mentally.
And it's not just the physical stuff. It's like seeing David's spirit breaking a little more each day, his dreams fading.
Yeah. You start to wonder, how do you hold on to hope when you're constantly struggling just to exist?
And that's what Dickens is exploring here. He shows how even the toughest people can get worn down when they're facing so much hardship.
Yeah.
But even in that awful place, the warehouse, David finds some connection with the Micawbers.
The Micawbers.
They're a breath of fresh air for him, even though they're struggling too.
They're such a fascinating family. They're always in debt, always on the verge of disaster.
Right.
But they never lose hope. They're always so optimistic.
Yeah.
It's admirable, but also kind of crazy.
It really is. And Mrs. Micawber, she never doubts her husband for a second. She has so much faith in him, even when it seems like he'll never get it together. You have to admire that kind of loyalty.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, that's the Dickensian optimism. No matter how bad things get, something will turn up. I think a lot of people feel that way, especially when times are tough.
And that whole journey to Plymouth, when Mr. Micawber finally decides to try his luck somewhere new, it's hilarious, but also kind of sad, It's like their whole relationship in a nutshell. Big dreams, blind faith, and a lot of love.
And even in that situation, they find a way to laugh. But it's a good reminder that even when things are terrible, there's always room for humor. And Dickens, he was good at that, finding the funny side of even the darkest things.
But for David, things are still pretty bleak. And then he makes this huge decision.
To run away.
Yeah, to his Aunt Betsy.
Wow. I mean, that's a bold move. Walking all that way from London to Dover, alone. As a kid. barely any money. Shows how desperate he was,
Hmm.
but also how brave.
Oh, yeah. That journey is a real test for him. He faces all kinds of challenges, meets some shady characters along the way. It's like a classic coming-of-age story.
Totally. Like the hero's journey. He goes through trials, he faces obstacles,
Mhm.
and he comes out changed on the other side. And that image of him arriving at Betsy's, covered in dirt, exhausted, but determined. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's like a new beginning for him. He's leaving all that bad stuff behind.
Exactly. And Betsy, who seemed so scary at first, she becomes his rescuer.
Yeah.
She gives him a home, a chance to start over.
And this is where things really start to change for David. With Betsy's support, he can finally get an education, explore his talents, start to heal from all that trauma.
He's not just surviving anymore. He's actually taking control of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's during this time that he meets some really important people,
Mm.
like Dr. Strong and his wife, Annie. They're so kind to him.
Yeah. The Strong's house, it's like a safe haven for David. But even there's still some darkness lurking, especially with Uriah Heep showing up again as Dr. Strong's clerk.
Yes, Uriah.
Yeah, not good. And that whole thing with him insinuating that something's going on between Annie and her music teacher, classic Uriah, planting seeds of doubt, trying to cause trouble.
He just loves to stir the pot.
It's a reminder that even when things seem good, you can't let your guard down. You never know what's really going on.
Exactly. And then there's Mr. Wickfield.
Mm.
Such a kind man, but troubled.
Yeah.
And he becomes another father figure to David.
But he's got his own demons, with the alcohol, and he's so vulnerable to Uriah's manipulations, it's sad to see.
It shows how anyone can be exploited,
Yeah.
especially when they're struggling with their own issues.
And then there's Agnes, Mr. Wickfield's daughter. She becomes such an important person in David's life.
She's amazing, so smart, so kind, always there for him.
Yeah, their relationship, it's really special. You see it grow from friendship into something deeper.
It feels real, like true love that grows over time.
Yeah.
Based on respect and understanding.
It's a nice contrast to his infatuation with Dora. With Agnes, there's substance, shared values.
Exactly. Dickens shows us that love can be complicated. It's not always fireworks and passion. Sometimes it's about finding someone who really gets you, who shares your goals.
And speaking of complicated love, David ends up in a relationship with Dora, even though he's growing closer to Agnes.
Classic head versus heart situation. He's drawn to Dora. She's beautiful and charming.
But their personalities, they just clash. She's sweet but naive, not really equipped to handle David's ambitions and the demands of his work.
It's a recipe for disaster. And it makes you wonder, is Dickens trying to warn us about sacrificing too much for love? Like, should you have to give up your dreams for a relationship?
It's something to think about for sure, even today. So many relationships struggle because people feel like they can't be themselves or they can't pursue what they want.
Yeah. And then you have this whole dramatic storyline with Emily,
Oh, yeah.
her disappearance, after Steerforth seduces her and then abandons her. It's so dark. It throws a shadow over everything.
It's a betrayal on so many levels. David trusted Steerforth, and to see him do something so cruel.
It reminds us that even the most charming people can be capable of terrible things, and you never really know who to trust. And the consequences of Steerforth's actions, they affect everyone.
And Mr. Peggotty, he never gives up searching for Emily. That shows real love and dedication, traveling to all these different places, facing danger, just hoping to bring her home.
It's like a parallel to David's own journey,
Hmm.
trying to find his place in the world. But Mr. Peggotty's quest, it's so much bigger and so much more heartbreaking.
Yeah, and while all this is going on, we can't forget about Uriah Heep, still lurking in the background, spinning his web of lies and manipulation.
Ugh. He's like a parasite.
Slowly taking control of Mr. Wickfield's life, pushing him towards ruin. It's like this classic battle between good and evil, Uriah representing all the worst parts of human nature. Greed, envy, the need for power.
Yeah. It's scary how he uses that fake humility to get what he wants.
But luckily, David's not going to just stand by and watch it happen.
Right. He figures out what Uriah's up to.
Yeah, with the help of his friends and his own sense of justice, he exposes Uriah for the fraud he is. It's a satisfying moment, seeing that manipulation finally backfire.
Oh, yeah.
It reminds us that even the cleverest liars can be caught. And sometimes you have to stand up and say something, even when it's risky.
Yeah.
But even as David's fighting these external battles, he's also dealing with a lot internally, especially with Dora.
It's heartbreaking watching her health decline
Mm.
and then her death. It makes David realize how fragile life is and how strong love can be, even when you lose someone.
And the way he cares for her when she's sick, It's so moving he puts his own life on hold to be there for her.
He's grown so much.
Hmm.
He's not that impulsive young man anymore. He's learned about sacrifice,
Hmm?
about compassion, about how complex relationships can be.
And as he's grieving for Dora, his connection with Agnes keeps getting stronger. She's there for him, a constant source of comfort.
And it's during this time that David starts to see Agnes differently.
Yeah.
He realizes how deep their bond is, how
Mhm.
much they share, the things that were missing with Dora.
It's like he's finally seeing clearly. He realizes that real love isn't just about passion, it's about those deeper connections.
Yeah.
And just when things are starting to settle down, David gets news that Emily has come back to England.
Oh, wow.
And that brings all the consequences of Steerforth's actions to the surface.
Emily's story is so tragic. It shows how damaging betrayal can be and how long the road to redemption can be.
And Mr. Peggotty, he still loves her, he forgives her. It's a beautiful thing, it gives you hope that even after terrible things happen, there's a chance for healing and forgiveness.
Yeah. It shows the strength of family
Mm-hmm.
and that belief that people can change.
Wow, it's amazing, isn't it, how Dickens juggles all these different stories at once. It's like this huge tapestry, but it's also so personal, you know? But taking a step back from all that, from the individual characters and their stories, what are some of the bigger ideas you see coming through in these excerpts?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me about David Copperfield, and a lot of Dickens' work, really,
Mm-hmm.
is how he connects those personal stories
Yeah.
to what's happening in society. It's not just about David's life. It's like a snapshot of that whole era. Victorian England,
Mm-hmm.
all the inequality, the injustice, it's all there.
Right, yeah, you see it everywhere in these excerpts. David slaving away at that warehouse, the macabre's always drowning and dead. It's not just bad luck. It's like, these were huge problems. That affected so many people back then.
Exactly. Dickens wasn't afraid to show the dark side of things.
Mm.
He wanted people to see the poverty,
Mm.
the exploitation, the hypocrisy of the rich and powerful.
Yeah, but it's not all doom and gloom. There's also this sense of hope. You know, people overcoming these challenges, like David. He's determined to make a better life for himself. And Peggotty, she's so loyal. And Agnes, she's always there to support David. They all go through so much, but they never give up.
It's like they represent the best of humanity,
Mhm.
hard work, compassion, integrity. And even though they're not perfect, they make mistakes. They inspire us to believe that things can get better for individuals and for society as a whole.
Yeah, and Dickens, even though he was so critical of society, he also understood people, He knew that even those who mess up, they can change, they can redeem themselves.
Right, like Mr. Micawber. He can be a bit much sometimes.
Yeah.
He's also a good friend to David. And in the end, he helps bring down Uriah Heep. So you realize he's not all talk.
Yeah.
He's got a good heart.
It makes you think twice about judging people too quickly,
Yeah.
Everyone has their own story.
Yeah. And that idea of second chances, it comes up again with Emily. After everything she goes through,
Mhm.
she gets a chance to redeem herself. And Mr. Peggotty, he forgives her. That's powerful stuff.
It shows you the power of love and that belief that people can change.
Yeah.
So in the end, David finds happiness. He finds success as a writer. He marries Agnes.
It's like he's finally found peace after all that he's been through.
And it's not like a fairy tale ending. It feels earned, He went through a lot to get there. And his relationship with Agnes, it's based on something real.
Yeah. They have so much in common. They respect each other. They support each other's dreams.
It's a good reminder that real love, it's about more than just passion. It's about partnership, shared goals.
And David's success as a writer, after all those struggles, it shows that you can achieve your dreams if you don't give up.
Right. It's not about luck. It's about hard work and believing in yourself.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways from David Copperfield is this idea of resilience, never giving up hope, believing in the power of love and forgiveness. Even when things are really dark, there's always a chance for things to get better.
It's a message that people still connect with today,
Yeah.
It's what makes David Copperfield such a timeless classic. And we've only just scratched the surface here. Hopefully this has made you want to dive in and explore more.
There's so much to discover in Dickens' work, so much depth, so many fascinating characters.
So until next time, keep reading, keep thinking, and keep those pages turning.